welcome to Puppet Camp. I think one of the things I was thinking about this morning was just how different things are. My very first Puppet Camp was way back in Amsterdam in 2011. And the fact that we've now moved on to this completely virtual setup is kind of, I think, testament to the resilience and the longevity of the puppet community. One of the things that I think has always been really great about our community, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit through the keynote, is just really how welcoming it is. And so for those of you who are new, because we always have a large proportion of folks who this is their very first puppet event every time we do one, we have a really welcoming community. You know, as Nick mentioned, come join us on Slack, on the Puppet Community Slack. And unlike, I think, some other technical communities I've been part of, everyone's always really welcoming and really helpful to new folks. So if you're just getting started with Puppet, if you're just joining this whole community, if you're embarking on your DevOps journey, however this is for you, please, join the community, and I'm sure you will get a very warm welcome. So with that, I'm going to kick into the keynote proper. So this is, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of a bunch of different things. So to start with, I think one of the things we're seeing increasingly is that those of you who are using Puppet are using it as part of a platform team, where you're starting to centralize IT functions, where you're starting to work out how to manage governance, how you're managing the heterogeneous, like highly varied environments that everyone works in. And in particular, you're caring about day two operations. It's not just about provisioning, it's not just about greenfield deployments, but it's about managing the complexity that you actually have right now. What we do see, however, though, is that there's sort of two main paths that people tend to take. Either your sort of underfunded, small resourced IT team tends to be a bit of a bottleneck on the organization, or you can end up being a catalyst. And one way I've been thinking about this lately has been the fact that breaking down the silos between development and operations, which is sort of one of the main goals of the DevOps movement when it started, is no longer really just enough. There's a whole rest of the business we need to interact with in order to actually sort of progress things along. So why is it that people are actually making investments in Puppet and choosing to use it? Well, I think one of the big things is that we've been a leader in the DevOps movement ever since the beginning. You know, when I first joined Puppet, which was quite a long time ago, just before that first Puppet camp, the DevOps movement was really only just starting to kick off. It was seeing that, startups and sort of forward-thinking folks were starting to investigate ways they could take advantage of new capabilities in terms of automation, new capabilities in terms of infrastructure as code, to really break down those silos between development and operations and solve that problem that many operations folks were receiving applications and payloads being huffed over the wall to them, and they didn't really have the autonomy or the responsibility to be able to actually fix those problems. We have the longest running body of DevOps research on the planet. We've had over 30,000 people contribute to the State of DevOps survey and report, and millions of people benefit from the earnings, ranging from individual contributors to team leads to even senior executives who start to really see what are the business benefits of taking a new approach to handling IT operations. We have, as I mentioned, one of the largest automation communities out there, and I'm genuinely really proud of the Puppet community. We see wonderful behaviors being modeled, new people are always coming in, they're being helped along on their journey. And we have this huge marketplace of content on the Forge that everyone contributes to. We have over 75% of commits come from the community there. And so if you're just getting started with Puppet, don't feel like you always have to write all of the Puppet code yourself to accomplish tasks. Go have a look at the Forge. If you find a module that does something you need, or even if it's 80 or 90% of what you need, focus on trying to build upon the work of others, because we've seen that sharing has been one of the key contributors to DevOps success. And that's both sharing inside your organization, as well as sharing with the wider community. We can all learn from each other's best practices and keep advancing them. And finally, we're a market leader. And I think we say this, quite proudly in terms of the fact that our automation platform gives you a bunch of different modes that you can actually operate in and that you can actually use to accomplish certain tasks, whether they be operational runbook automation, to desired state configuration, to managing continuous compliance at scale. So what does that mean when it comes to scale? So scaling your automation tools can be really challenging as your complexity grows. And it's not just scale in terms of your deployment getting larger and larger, it's increasing the surface area of automation that's actually going on. And we're seeing that the real key to scaling your operations is self-service. There's always going to be more consumers of the infrastructure that you're managing than you have people managing it. And the key there is really to let people work at a really fast feedback cycle, work at the speed they need, by taking the automation and the infrastructure that you're building and exposing it as a self-service service internally inside your organization. And we're seeing from a lot of the research out there that this is the biggest limitation in terms of scale. People who don't follow a self-service approach and keep with an old sort of manual ticket-based system for managing workflow, they're the ones who tend to fail at scale. And we talked about heterogeneity. I think a lot of the time, one of the things I find a bit frustrating about conference talks and technology releases is that people tend to focus on greenfield deployments and just the provisioning aspect of things. I think one of the things we've always been really proud of at Puppet is that we have a really pragmatic approach and recognize that everyone has multiple kinds of technology and that that's breadth is only increasing, and that the real problems aren't just in provisioning. The real problems that are the hard, difficult problems that are worth solving are those ongoing operational costs, because those are the things that really drag you down in terms of trying to advance things. And we see there that most people are spending lots of their time on actually just keeping the lights on in terms of functionality. We're seeing that people are adopting, as the scale is increased, as the breadth of the kinds of things they're trying to manage increases, unless you're focused on automating those things and progressing and continuing to invest in your platform and making sure that new capabilities emerge and are being exposed to the rest of the business by self-service, you're going to end up drowning underneath this sort of barrage of keeping the lights on work. So what are the things we're sort of talking about here? So I think back to my original sort of thread about how the approach we need to take is more than just development and operations these days, is we're seeing that there's shared challenges across the business. And you look at things like change management, compliance, security, all of these things IT can be a really, really key enabler for, because the rest of the business is facing all sorts of pressures as well. All of these challenges about the rapidly changing environment are causing different teams across the organization to feel under pressure and underwater. And IT can really help improve all of those different areas. So we see that there's more complexity. Everyone has more tools. We've been using the term digital duct tape for a lot of these things that have been tied in the business. New tools are appearing to solve lots of different problems. I think we've well moved beyond the point where a single vendor solves all of these problems inside the organization. And so working out how to tie all of these things together in order to actually deliver value, it becomes more and more critical. Managing infrastructure has gotten more complicated than ever. Goals like security become further out of reach, but it's about collaborating and moving across these boundaries, breaking down more silos across the business and exposing the functionality that you're creating to wider and wider areas. And so how are people doing this? We tend to see that there's three pillars. There's a reason infrastructure as code has been such a sort of persistent technology, has created so much value for folks, because it enables all sorts of things. We're seeing that just being able to define the state that infrastructure should be in, define the runbook automation tasks that you're running, putting those in code, putting them in version control, being able to collaborate across the business so that different teams can actually look at the work other teams are doing and create improvements on them, and then exposing them via self-service. Doing this sort of work requires that you're actually delivering automation in all sorts of different modes. It's no longer good enough to just do desired state configuration, to just do task-based automation, but being able to share a common language across all of these things and be able to leverage it in different kinds of environments, and then wrap it and expose it via APIs so that people can either trigger it by hand, put it at the end of their CI/CD system. This is the way that we're seeing people actually succeed. So with that, I want to go through a couple of case studies of Puppet customers who've gotten an awful lot of value out of taking this sort of approach. We're really huge fans of the folks at Transurban who are in Australia because they've really taken an incredibly modern approach to the way they're doing all sorts of things. They're doing chat ops, they're taking the automation that they're doing, exposing it via different interfaces to the rest of the business, integrating into their ITSM systems. And this isn't just restricted to IT. When you talk to the folks at Transurban, I think one of the things I find really interesting about them is they've really reached across the organizational barriers inside their organization, and they work closely with change management, with their risk management folks. So for those, I should have probably introduced this, but for those who don't know Transurban, they manage a lot of the really huge toll roads in Australia. So they're subject to a lot of the same kinds of regulatory burdens that those of you who might be in medical or financial services, or any of those areas where you have regulations imposed on you from outside. They have all of these sorts of issues. But they've actually turned into a world, they've created a world where they can do self-service infrastructure provisioning in a really sort of full stack approach, and in a way that really benefits the compliance folks, the risk folks, and the auditors inside their business. So they've automated all of their on-premise platforms with a pretty complicated technology stack, but because they've invested in wrapping the right levels of abstraction around those things, giving people the right amount of choice in terms of how they're consuming things, and really tread that boundary between standardization and choice that allows the whole business to move really, really quickly. So the New York Stock Exchange, who I'm sure many of you have heard of, also have a huge regulatory burden and an incredible amount of pressure in terms of uptime and reliability and stability of their platform. And that sort of pressure, I think, is one that many of us probably don't have to experience in our jobs. But they've gotten a huge amount of value out of Puppet Enterprise, and they've been one of our longest running customers. I think when I first joined Puppet, they really just started on the journey there. They really needed to work out how to scale up workloads and increase efficiency. They were just spending too much time on provisioning infrastructure, on developers waiting for infrastructure to be provisioned. They've managed to get to the point now where server provisioning is 144 times faster than it was before, and allowing the developers to actually spend time on development. I think one of the challenges when you're doing software development is interrupts really interrupt the flow of the innovation that you're trying to create and that you're trying to deliver on top of the infrastructure. And so the more you can make that self-service, speed up that provisioning, make it consistent, make it easier to tell the difference between testing an issue in development and test and production, and creating consistent environments, all of those, across all of those, leads to just higher quality applications. And because Puppet Enterprise is enforcing all of this consistency across all of these environments, it allows them to focus on their core responsibilities, which is building applications and delivering them. And then we have Guardian Life. Like many enterprise orgs, they support a whole bunch of different applications, and they have lots and lots of technical debt. This is a 159-year-old company. And I think this brings me to a point that often I think people don't recognize that there's a whole bunch of stuff built up over successful companies have built up processes, they've built up legacy or heritage environments, and there's huge cost savings and efficiency savings that can be gained by actually focusing on those things. I think, again, to return to an earlier theme, I think people too often focus on what they can do in terms of greenfield environments and don't focus on actually improving their legacy environments. And those are the things that not only deliver lots of value and usually revenue to the business, but there's huge opportunities there in terms of efficiency gains that can be made possible. So we helped them migrate more than 200 applications to the cloud in less than 2 years. And this wasn't just taking existing workloads and moving them to the cloud and then saying that we were done. Because Puppet Enterprise was able to provide standardization and increase the level of standardization across the deployment as part of this work, that allowed them to move quickly and allowed them to have the confidence and the guardrails in order to move workloads from one location to another and deprecate existing data centers. So if we look at the product portfolio, I think this is where we've advanced an awful lot in the last couple of years in particular. It's not just about Puppet Enterprise. We've got Bolt, which is our standalone task execution system. We've got continuous delivery for Puppet Enterprise, which for those of you who haven't seen, I think has been the next natural evolution of infrastructure as code. We needed to take an approach of, it's not just about writing the code and pushing it out to production, it's about managing the pipelines about providing, again, those guardrails that allow people to push automation at scale so that they can have the confidence that the right kind of tests are being run, the right kinds of syntax checking, acceptance tests, all of these things can be executed as part of the safety net for your deployment of automation across the organization. And I think in particular, as you start to expose Puppet functionality to the rest of the business, this is the sort of thing you need for the people who are perhaps part-time Puppet administrators inside your organization. We have Puppet Remediate, which was, again, I think a focus of ours on trying to break down silos in the organizations. We kept seeing that people had the same problem of receiving this huge spreadsheet of vulnerabilities that they needed to deal with in operations, and never really having the context to how do we prioritize those things, and how do we make sure that we're dealing with the most critical vulnerabilities and remediating them as needed. Relay is really, really exciting. That is our focus on event-driven workflows. We see that as the future of operations changes and the surface area of the operating system shrinks, we're not getting rid of the complexity, because I think one of the things we've seen from all evolutions in terms of technology is that we create new kinds of complexity as per virtualization and all of the different advances we've seen in the industry. The complexity we see now is about tying all of these different tools together. Even as the surface area of the operating system shrinks, the complexity of your workflows increases as more people inside your organization are having to interact with various bits of technology, and as new tools are being deployed across your environment. What all of this means is that Relay is essentially a composable, modular, event-driven workflow system. You can take many of the same benefits of infrastructure as code that we've done for desired state management and apply them to consuming workflows where you're taking bits of content that other people have written and tying them together for your own business logic. And we don't always talk about this as a product, but I think one of the greatest things about the whole Puppet ecosystem is the Puppet Forge. We have a huge amount of content there, ranging from managing all sorts of different attributes on Windows, on Linux machines, on network devices, on storage devices, and being able to stand upon the shoulders of the giants who've come before you. It really lets you progress along in your automation journey. And finally, last but by no means least, almost all of this is built on open source technology. Open source is incredibly important to us at Puppet. We have Puppet itself has always been a core open source project, and all of that content that you see on the Forge is content that you can contribute to as well, and help the rest of the community as well as helping yourself. So where do we see the world going? We see that this need for a platform team inside your organization that lots of people make use of, this complexity and breadth and scale of the world that you're having to interact with, means that you need multiple modes of operation in terms of automation. You need task-driven work for those operational tasks that can be quite time-consuming. You need the model-driven approach in order to deliver continuous compliance and ensure state is managed over time. And you need an event-driven approach in order to be able to tie together things and move quickly at the speed of particularly modern cloud-native infrastructure. And all of this needs to work across the cloud environments, your edge computing environments, your existing data centers, and to be interoperable across all of these things. And with that, thank you very much. And I'm really excited to see the rest of Puppet Camp Netherlands.